Between 1975 and 1990, roughly 40% of American kids came home to an empty house every single day. Nobody tracked them, nobody texted them. And here's the part no one talks about. Researchers who studied those kids expected to find damage. Instead, they found something the modern world can't manufacture anymore. And once you see what it is, you'll understand why your kids can't do what you did at 9 years old, and why that's not their fault. It's ours. Let's cut the nostalgia right now, because this isn't going to be one of those "we drank from the garden hose" videos. You've seen 1,000 of those. This is about something darker, and honestly more interesting. Gen X didn't choose to become competent. Competence was the ransom the world demanded, and we paid it before we hit puberty. Here's the data nobody puts in the memes. The U.S. divorce rate peaked in 1980, around 5.2 divorces per 1,000 people, the highest ever recorded in American history. At the exact same time, women were entering the workforce at record speed. By 1985, over half of mothers with children under 6 were employed. Do the math on who was watching the kids. Nobody. That's the answer. The term Latchkey kid wasn't a lifestyle brand, it was a census category. And developmental psychologists panicked. In 1986, researcher Laurence Steinberg published studies expecting latchkey kids to be walking disasters, more anxious, more delinquent, more broken. What did the research actually find? Kids who went home to an empty house and followed a routine were largely indistinguishable from supervised kids on adjustment measures. Read that again. The absence of adults didn't break them, it rewired them. They became their own supervisors, internal, portable, permanent. That's the thing modern parenting literature calls self-regulation and charges $34.99 a hardcover to teach. Gen X got it for free, at age 8, standing on a chair boiling water. And notice what nobody built for them: a feedback loop. Without tracking apps or adult validation, they handled things alone. Psychologists call this self-efficacy. Gen X just calls it Tuesday. But here's where I stop being sentimental, because survival skills isn't just knowing how to make dinner from a can and shame. It's a psychological architecture. Let me show you the blueprint, piece by piece. Piece 1. Unstructured problem solving. Peter Gray, research professor at Boston College, has documented for years that free, unsupervised play is where children learn risk assessment, negotiation, and emotional control, and that this kind of play has been declining in America for over half a century. Gray argues this decline tracks with rising anxiety and declining sense of control in young people. Gen X sits on the last ledge of that cliff. We were the final cohort raised in the wild before childhood got fenced in. Piece 2. Navigation without a net. If you were born in 1970, you were 37 when the iPhone launched. Your entire skill-forming window, every wrong turn, every broken-down car, every figure-it-out moment, happened offline. There's real research here. A well-known 2020 study in Scientific Reports involving nearly 300,000 players of the game Sea Hero Quest found that people who grew up driving and navigating themselves performed better at wayfinding, and habitual GPS use has been linked in other studies to worse spatial memory over time. Use it or lose it isn't a slogan, it's neuroscience. Gen X built the hippocampal muscle. Everyone after got the crutch first. Piece 3. Boredom tolerance. This one's the sleeper. Psychologists like Sandy Mann at the University of Central Lancashire have shown in experiments that boredom actually boosts creative output. Bored people generate more ideas. Gen X marinated in boredom. Sunday afternoons in the 80s were so empty they had texture. You want to know why that generation produced grunge, indie film, and the early internet? Boredom plus zero supervision is a startup incubator. Today, the average person reaches for a phone within seconds of stillness. The incubator's been demolished and a dopamine dispensary built on the lot. Now, here's the twist, because I promised you this wasn't a victory lap. Those survival skills came with a bill, and Gen X is paying it right now, quietly, the way they do everything. A 2019 MetLife workplace study literally nicknamed Gen X the forgotten generation, squeezed between louder cohorts, carrying the highest debt loads, sandwiched between aging parents and dependent kids. And self-reliance, the crown jewel of the skill set, has a shadow side. People trained young to never need anyone are statistically terrible at asking for help. That's not a personality quirk. That's an 8-year-old's coping strategy running unpatched software in a 55-year-old's brain. So the honest question isn't, why is Gen X so capable? It's this. Is a survival skill still a skill if you can't turn it off? And here's the part that should actually worry you, the last generation part of the title. This isn't doomer talk about kids today being soft. The kids are fine. The environment changed. Skills don't come from lectures, they come from necessity, and we systematically removed the necessity. Jonathan Haidt and Lenore Skenazy have documented the collapse of childhood independence. The distance kids are allowed to roam alone has shrunk dramatically over 3 generations. In the 1970s, a kid might range miles from home. Today, many aren't allowed past the driveway. You cannot develop wayfinding in a hallway. You can't develop risk calibration in a padded room. Here's the cruel irony. The safer we made childhood, the more dangerous we made adulthood. Every risk we deleted at 9 resurfaces at 29. The first lease, the first layoff, the first crisis with no adult coming. The bill for an unsupervised childhood was paid early. The bill for a supervised one arrives late with interest. We didn't raise a fragile generation. We built a fragile habitat and got exactly the inhabitants it produces. That's not an insult to anyone. That's just ecology. So what actually transfers? Because if you're Gen X watching this, you've probably tried to hand these skills down and watch them bounce off. Here's why. You're transferring answers when the skill was never the answer. It was the silence before the answer, the empty house, the unfilled afternoon, the adult who wasn't coming. You can't gift that. You can only get out of the way and let a small, survivable version of it happen. Researchers in risky play, like Ellen Sandsetter in Norway, have shown that children who get graduated exposure to risk develop less anxiety, not more. Fear shrinks with contact. Every generation before us knew this without a single peer-reviewed paper. And if you're younger and watching this, Gen Z, millennial, whoever, don't take this as an attack. Take it as a map. The skills aren't genetic, they're environmental, which means they're recoverable. Turn off the GPS on a drive you half know. Sit in boredom for 20 minutes without reaching for the rectangle. Fix one thing this month with your hands and no tutorial past the first minute. That's not a lifestyle challenge. That's rehab for an atrophied muscle every human is born with. And here's the test to know it's working. The moment something breaks and your first instinct isn't to search, ask, or outsource, but to stare at it for 10 seconds and think, let me try. That pause is the entire inheritance. Gen X can't write it down for you, but they left the door unlocked. They always do. Because here's the closing thought, and I want it to sit with you the way an empty house at 3:40 in the afternoon used to sit with a 9-year-old. Gen X isn't the last generation capable of survival skills. They're just the last one that got them by accident. Everyone after has to choose them on purpose. And choosing is harder, but it might be the only version that doesn't come with the scar tissue. The house key is still under the mat. Somebody just has to decide to walk home alone. If this rearranged something in your head, you know what to do. And if you're Gen X, you'll do it without being told. You always have.